good day, and welcome to the MMA podcast between Noah,
Chris,
and our respective blogs in the MMA. I write on welterweight weight class called The Welter Weigh-In.
And I cover women's MMA with WMMA Mania.
And we're here to talk about both topics in the welterweight weight class and women's MMA, alongside with a focus on what just happened this past weekend in UFC 247, the controversial decision between Jon Jones and Dominic Reyes. So a lot to talk about on this podcast today, right, Christian?
Yes, and there's a lot of controversial, or you know what? Look, we don't want to call them robberies and stuff like that, especially with the main event with Jon Jones. But there were it was close, but other fights weren't close. With a perfect example with Murthy against Lee. Lee, for a lot of people, she clearly won that fight, and she was upset about what transpired, which we'll dive into that later on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, and I like how there's also an influence from those women fights that really took into initiative and the decisions that were made in other fights that were really significant fights. One of those significant fights being the Shevchenko versus Cokagan fight, and that was a great fight up until Cokagan got knocked out via ground and pound in the third round. What did you think about that fight, Christian, and how do you think that's going to shake up the women's flyweight division?
I think at first, because and Joe Rogan asked Valentina, he's like, look, you've beaten everyone. What's next for you? Do you go up weight and et cetera? And she was like, no. She named three opponents. She was like, no, there's Maya, there's Roxanne, right, Modafferi, and so hey, look, basically she's implying, hey, look, there's still like a lot of work to be done in the flyweight, and perhaps if she gets those three fights, then they'll make that trilogy with Amanda Nunes, and that's very exciting.
That is exciting.
And I'll say this because Joe Rogan said, and in the promo, building up to the whole card, he was saying she's the best mixed martial artist, one of the greatest mixed martial artists, and not from men or women, like as a whole.
It is a whole stylistically.
But look, she's a black belt in judo, and her Muay Thai is just phenomenal. Stand up, so
wrestling too.
Yeah, wrestling, and then the jiu-jitsu is improving. And Joe Rogan was saying that she's getting better, and in a post interview he was saying it's scary. Yeah. It's scary how every fight you're getting better, and I think give her like a year or two, and when she fights Amanda Nunes for that trilogy, I think she poses the biggest threat. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, hands down. And that's the best women's fight you can ask for if you're Dana White. I mean, especially pay-per-view wise, that's a pay-per-view main event, not just a co-main event. That's a main event. And what I've actually noticed in women's fighting, especially now we're looking into 248, there's a lot of women's fighting like big championship bouts that are just co-main events, not main events. Do you think there's something behind that?
Yeah, one thing that UFC is doing, and I remember at the beginning, Dana White was like, I don't think that women's MMA would be like, be able to market that and stuff. But look at it now; it's huge. We went from Ronda Rousey, just one sensation, some sensational star, and now main events, co-main event, and they're selling. And what drives this? And Dana White's looking at the numbers. If you look at their Instagram followers or stuff like that, like Shevchenko, right? Valentina Shevchenko or Joanna. I mean, they have millions and millions of followers. They're basically influencers, right? They're fighters that are influencers, and I mean the marketing dollars are behind them. It's oh my goodness, it's amazing, how much revenue they're creating, and not just in the fights, but also commercials and via other aspects of this promotional world. So, I mean, it's growing. And yeah, man, the UFC 248 is going to be very exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be Weili Zhang versus Joanna. Her last name's very hard to pronounce, so I'm not going to attempt it. But
I think it's Joanna Jacek. Yeah,
Jacek. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But that's going to be a great fight. I mean, you got the former champion in Joanna against a champion in Zhang who beat a Rose Namajunas, right? So, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. No, it's definitely huge. And, she was just this sensation. And everyone was saying, is Zhang legit? Because, she was fighting over there in Asia. And then when she started fighting, when she fought Andrade, it was like, wow.
Or Andrade. I meant to say Andrade, not Nunez.
Yeah,
sorry.
my bad. Yeah.
That was my bad. That was my fault.
Yeah.
All good.
But I mean, like, she just demolished her. You know, it wasn't even a competition. I mean, like, her striking and her whole demeanor as a fighter and her strength. So against Joanna that throws, you know, she's look, I really don't like to compare fighters, especially male and female, to each other. But I would say this, so she's like a Max Holloway. Like, the volume of punches and her footwork is just exceptional. And then, you know, she's gonna fight against Zhang that brings this power and this toughness, and her technique is nothing to joke about. I mean, her kicks are vicious.
Oh, yeah, indeed. So you write your blog about women's fighting. You've wrote a couple blogs already about it. And what facets in perspectives do you write these blogs, and what interests you most and intrigues you most about women's fighting?
I think one thing intrigues me the most, I remember the first card, right, that they had in when
Ronda Rousey?
With Ronda Rousey, when Ronda Rousey was fighting, and a lot of people was like, you know, what's going to happen if there's something severe, you know, because it's just that perception, you know, like a woman shouldn't be in a fighting cage and stuff like that. But as it built along, actually, they produced one of the most exciting fights, because they're just throwing a whole volume of punches, and you know, there's this aggression about it.
Different array of styles.
Yeah, and it's very fascinating, and actually, this is proven scientifically. Like a lot of women are more flexible than men, and their ground game is exceptional. And
there's different combinations of moves that they can perform.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, Ronda Rousey would always talk about that. You know, and one thing that's so impressive. And look, let's say if the person's a casual fan, you know, usually the significant strikes is what they look at. You're like, okay, you want to see someone get knocked out. But a purist or someone that's very into mixed martial arts, it's very artful, man, to see like Valentina Shevchenko, like, you know, those judo throws, and then when she landed on a crucifix.
Yeah.
And then she was holding both of her arms.
That was game over right there. When she landed in that crucifix, I mean, she's really strong from that position. She's looking to finish.
Yeah. So that's something that I truly, look, for me personally, it really got me into women's MMA, because it's just different dynamics, and you know,
I like that.
On the men's side, they bring something else to it as well. And look, and I want to make this argument. I think this sport is more equal than any other sport,
100%.
comparing like basketball and other sports.
100%. I think you hit that right on the nose, because they put women's fighting in the same event, and a main card event that is pay-per-view as a co-main event. You got a women's fight right there, and a women's fight that is really highly touted, especially with this past event in UFC 247.
Yeah, and look, perfect example is, you know, how much money Ronda Rousey made.
Yeah.
Or look at the contract. Look, we don't know I don't think the numbers are disclosed or anything like that. But they were saying, and the promoter, what's his name? The promoter for Bellator was saying, hey, look, it's up there, if not even higher than the Ronda Rousey contract. So we're talking millions. And for like a women fighter, that's huge.
That's producing millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That is huge. Yes. 100%. So, I mean, at that point of equality, especially in today's world that we live in, that is fighting for that equality, especially in respective sports, in soccer, basketball, even hockey for that matter, especially basketball nowadays with the, WNBA, and of course with the recent tragedy in the Kobe Bryant case, and understanding that there was also a future WNBA star that could have been involved, like those kinds of things. Like you look at that, you look into the future and say women's sports and women athletes are going to be more included. And now we see that in the UFC. And I think that there's the UFC in ways and MMA are setting those standards because of that equality. Yeah. And
one thing that really pops into mind is because look, when you play a sport, it's like, okay, because the whole argument with the WNBA, and I actually used to cover the league, and it was like, well, it's not competitive or it's not entertaining. But listen, when someone's putting their life on the line, they're taking shots in the head and the kicks and the whole elbows, the whole nature of fighting, you have mad respect for them. Like, that's competition to its fullest, right? It tests the human spirit, and I think that's why fans, they just love it,
Yeah.
They just love the whole entertaining part, and there's just a level for respect. Anyone that fights at any level, from like 6 years old, you get into boxing or any type of martial arts to a full adult, there's just that reverence and that respect.
Yeah, 100%. Hit it right on the nose. And then on the other hand, you got other different fighters, regardless of weight class. I always thought that there should be a women's welterweight weight class.
Actually, that would be one thing that I definitely wanted to see. And look, this is okay. So this is like for a whole different podcast, but it's actually the crossing over promotion and stuff like that, because what the PFL is doing, I like that, the lightweight, you know what I mean? And imagine if like one day
the women's lightweight,
lightweight with Kayla Harrison. Imagine her fighting against Chris Cyborg. So before she signed with Bellator, I was thinking, hey, look, if you can like just work something out, or like if PFL can offer you a little bit more money. And because that would be the fight to make. That for me, that would be the fight of the century, to see Cyborg against Harrison. Of course, we still want to see the Amanda Nunes against Chris Cyborg, but man, Harrison, like 155. That's
a good weight class. That's a great weight class.
So that's something that hey, like they were talking. Hey, look. It can happen, man.
Yeah.
You never know.
The reason why I ask is because, I write my blog on the welterweight class in the men's division, and I'm imagining how competitive that would be in the women's division, And,
one thing in Asia, because they actually have, all the way up to heavyweight, I believe is, I'm trying to think of the name, but there's a couple promotions that they actually have welterweight. And then after welterweight, I think they just go straight to heavyweight, because the weight, I don't think it's 200 pounds. I think it's a little bit less or something. So they kind of adjust it,
Well, it's because of the natural weights that, that differentiate the women and men's divisions. Yeah. Because, that's why there's less women's divisions, because naturally, a women's weight, athletic weight, is much like 50 pounds on average less than like a male who is 210 pounds and is jacked up like a heavyweight contender would be.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. But like, you see that in different fighters. But yeah, so as we transition into the welterweight class for UFC and everything that surrounds that, in which I write about in the welterweight, I think arguably that is the most contested weight class. I don't know. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, no doubt. Look, before it was, especially when Conor McGregor was gone, right? Like the lightweight kind of went down, and then you have Khabib,
the emerging of the welterweight class after that.
Yeah. So I just felt like that was a good period for a guy like Jorge Masvidal, which it's kind of funny because Kobe Covington calls him a journeyman and stuff like that. And in a sense, he kind of was, right. He was, he would win 2 fights, lose 2 fights. And, but look, to respect to him, there were split decisions. And I just felt, Conor being away for a little bit, it kind of gave the welterweight, that spotlight.
Yeah.
And the welterweight, it's stacked with talent, man. And you know what? Kobe Covington, he lost, he got finished by Usman. But listen, if they would fight again, and if let's say if it's not a grudge match and he actually is level-headed, I think he can win that fight.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's so competitive. You have Usman, you have him, you have Masvidal, you have all the trash talking, you have Edwards.
Because that's the next big fight is Woodley versus Edwards. Now we're going to see who's going to emerge off of that fight. That's a fight night main event right there that could easily be put on a pay-per-view card.
Yeah.
And that's the next big thing, I think, in the welterweight class. And then who can forget about Stephen Thompson? And then the newest addition, in which I just recently wrote about, was Michael Chiesa, and his win over former champion Rafael Dos Anjos. So that's huge. That is huge to say that. Not even that, when we're already saying that this division is stacked, there's still fighters that are being added to the stacked division. It's ridiculous. And the fact to say that Conor McGregor's ranked 15th in the welterweight division right now, it says a lot about the welterweight division.
Yeah, it says a lot. Even though we all know he's a natural lightweight.
Yes.
But look, that division is just so sad. Chiesa, look, there's so many storylines, and Chiesa calling out Kobe, and then Kobe and not Usman,
Masvidal.
Yeah, Masvidal. They still have that tension.
Yeah. So and a possible fight in July between those two. It says on this website that they're already fighting, but nothing has become official. I thought they would officialize something prior to UFC 247 about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. But Dana White was saying, hey, look, guys, it's going to happen.
Yeah, he said that over Super Bowl weekend. He was on a podcast, and he was talking about how there's a possible fight between Jorge Masvidal and Kamaru Usman. And guess what happened? There's a feud that went down in the media press where both fighters, Usman and Masvidal, were in the same room. and they ended up getting into a confrontation and an exchange of words, which could be the start of some bad blood between the two and a possible really good fight. A fight. I also wrote recently whether or not, since Jorge Masvidal has the belt for the BMF belt, the baddest mother bleep belt, should that be involved in this championship fight?
You know what? I actually love that idea. And that's something going, of course, this is all MMA, but, just having the boxing background, I think just putting, I'm so into the catch weight, right? I wish Dana White can just buy into that.
Okay.
With Amanda and Valentina, just get a catch weight, right? 130 or something like that, and then just put your belts on the line. I like that idea. Put the BMF and put the title belt. Why not?
Yeah.
And fans will love it. It's just all or nothing, right?
Yeah, it also gives out the opportunity for the BMF belt to be vacant, and then that could be implemented into another division, lightweight division. But I mean, come on, this welterweight division has a lot of BMFs to it, so I mean, you got to think that this BMF belt is staying within the welterweight division, or give that belt to Khabib Nurmagomedov, because that guy is a true blood-bred BMF. Even though he's very humble in a lot of ways, but that. The reason why I say you should involve the BMF belt is because you got two BMF-like fighters, and the loser should get that BMF belt and hold it for that next big main event, because that's just a money fight right there between the BMF belt and title shot, and then the next shot for BMF, that's another big fight, because then it can involve Conor McGregor or some other welterweight that emerges.
What do you say in a sense? It's kind of like an interim belt type of thing, or
like in terms of this fight?
Yeah. So with the BMF, do you think it should become a belt like that?
I think the essence behind the BMF belt goes beyond not just the title belt, but also that kind of temporary belt, which is of course that belt you just the interim belt, which is the temporary belt. So that's not the BMF belt. That's not. The BMF belt is earned through a different style of fighting. I think the whole narrative behind fighting is being a bad mother bleep, Yeah. That's the whole narrative behind it, and to award a fighter based on that is pretty significant, and that's why it was a big significant fight between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, is because who's going to be that fighter who is going to come out and say, hey, I'm that baddest mother bleep. I am that fighter who kind of fits that narrative perfectly and epitomizes that narrative. I think that's why this belt transcends the title and everything else, because it follows probably that most important narrative in fighting, is that who's that BMF,
But what's interesting, because so Nate was like, I'm basically the baddest. Hey, George, let's fight. But the fans had a lot to do with it. They were pushing it. Yeah, let's make this title. And of course, Nate had a lot to do with it. But the fans were backing it.
Yeah.
And in Twitter, the MMA Twitter is just crazy. It's like, yes, let's do this. Make an actual belt. And at first, Dana was like, that's not going to happen. And so what I proposed to the UFC would be, how about let the fans choose? Do a poll, who is the baddest?
Yeah, and you got social media to do that. Right? You got social media to do that. So UFC posted, even as we get into the conversation of UFC 247, was that, what were your, they posted on Twitter, UFC did, what were your thoughts on this fight? Who won? Give us your scorecards. And I was just looking down everywhere between this Jones and Dominic Reyes fight, was people were voting 48-47 for Dominic Reyes, that's what I have. Yeah. 48-47 for Dominic Reyes. What did you have in that fight?
Oh, for sure. Look, okay, so John Jones was saying that, he finished the last two rounds strong and that he got the takedowns. But first of all, and a lot of fans, and I remember ESPN Ariel Helwani was going off because he was like, listen, you don't score in, he didn't do enough to overthrow the champion, because it's different if Reyes, which is kind of true. I don't like this logic, but it's true. If Reyes was the champion, yeah, he would have gotten in the fight. Or let's say he was fighting someone else. Because John Jones, we're talking about legacy. We're talking about arguably probably the greatest mixed martial artist. So, I just feel, which is it's messed up, but logically, a lot of fans are thinking like this. Hey, if it was someone else, Reyes would have won for sure. Yeah. And for me, yeah, Reyes won. I mean, he dominated the first 3 rounds. And see, we have this problem, and we can dive in it with the women's divisions, is that takedowns, because it's mixed martial arts, right? So a lot of takedowns it's worth more than significant strikes and etc. But the criteria is not really that, you know what I mean? So my thing is this: the judging criteria should be who caused the most damage. In other words, if you can look at someone's face or their body, the bruises.
Yeah, but the problem is behind that is that everybody has like a certain amount of scar tissue.
Well,
they cut
true
easier.
Yeah.
Like Nate Diaz is a great example of that. He got cut by Jorge Masvidal on a punch that doesn't usually cut a normal fighter, and he bled out, and they had to stop the fight because he was bleeding out too much.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that's wrong behind that.
Yeah, I see. But like, so my thing is kind of just measuring like the. I mean, look, it's difficult though. It's difficult. You know, something that the fans got to kind of understand too is MMA is very young. It's still evolving.
Yes.
You know, I mean, even people covering it, it's like they're still learning. You know, it's just it's something new. You know,
see, and that's what's funny about that is because like each fight gives us a lesson, and that's what we have to unpack on from Saturday night is like the lessons that we learned from those controversial decisions that the judges had to make. And it was a hard fight to judge, yes, but yeah, it was racist fight to win.
Yeah. So you know, just going with Lee's fight, right? On Andrea Lee and she lost against Murthy.
Yeah.
Look, let's see. If you look at the damage that Murthy took, and listen, you know, because people were saying because her nose was broken in the first round, and a lot of judges look at that. Yeah. But they just felt that Murthy was like landing she landed more significant strikes, right? Yeah. But Lee was like, she was adding the pressure, you know, cage control, and there's a lot of aspects to it. You get what I'm saying? And then so after the fight, you know, and Joe Rogan during commentating, he was like saying, look, the judge is not even looking at the fight. The judge was standing up, and then he was looking at his phone, and you know, and him and Dominic Cruz just were in awe. They were saying, this is insane. You know, the judges are not even paying attention to the fight. And Lee was actually asking for fans, hey, look, you know, send your evidence and footage to the commission. And, you know, if this guy was on his phone and if he wasn't watching my fight, he should get fired. Yeah.
Oh, what? Yeah. You kidding me? Yeah, of course you should get fired. If you get paid to watch fights live and you get, you know, like you don't have to pay to get into the event, but yet rather you get paid, you better be paying attention to those fights and not on your phone. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And then, you know, actually just going to like a couple of events. Remember when the UFC was in Mexico City? I believe that was in.
Yep.
Was it in November? No, it was in October, I believe.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. So Alexa Grasso, which, you know, she's like.
I remember that fight.
Yeah, and Alexa Grasso is like the face of she's one of the faces of Mexico. And she fought against what do you call it, Mexican American in Carla Esparza. Yep. Esparza, look, she had her takedowns. I believe it was like 3 or 4, right? But Alexa, she did not, but she took the fight to her, and she just outclassed her, outboxed her, landed powerful shots, and Carla really didn't do much. You know, she didn't have a lot of you know, time on the ground, and she wasn't advancing position. I think that's important. That's one thing that Jones really didn't do. You know, he didn't really like. I mean, like Reyes just got right up, and with the Carla Esparza against Grasso was the same thing too. And then we can even go to when Marina Rodriguez when she fought against Cynthia Cavello. She oh my goodness, you know, her Muay Thai was just exceptional. And one thing about elbows and knees, like they're just vicious. And you know, she started bleeding. Cynthia started bleeding. But then the last round, she took her down, and she was pounding her, and you know, she caused a lot of damage. But that's just one round. I mean, yeah. Marina dominated 2 rounds, but the refs are seeing that. They're looking at the damage. So it's more to your point. Yeah. It's kind of, I'm kind of, you know, it's just like, it's kind of ironic.
Should that be ethical?
Yeah. So I'm kind of going against what I just said about the damage, but at the end, because
at the end of the day, I mean, if judges have a hard time judging the fight, they're going to utilize the damage that has been inflicted on the fighter as an excuse to say, oh, this fighter obviously lost because they took more damage. And that's the easy way of saying someone won a fight. But at the same time, you can really see the true colors of a fighter based on how much damage they can take.
Yeah.
And I think that's what can help them win a fight, because you're trained to take a punch. As a UFC fighter, probably one of the first things you do in training is take a punch.
Yeah.
It's like you get punched in the face. You need to take that. And I feel like the true essence of a fighter is how they can take that. And that's why I was mad when Nate, in that Nate Diaz fight, in that welterweight fight between him and Jorge Masvidal. And I think I'm using that as my example in the welterweight division as a judging fight, but that was the doctor's fault, I believe. That a fight can get canceled or it stopped because someone's bleeding out. Someone is, bleeding out too much that it's just not good enough. But I don't like that, because that fighter can take it. Yeah. If the fighter can take it, let him fight.
Well, the other thing is this: when you're talking about the tissue and stuff like that, like, because Nate, he bleeds easily. So, and I think the doctors that are actually at the fights and the referees, they need to be aware. They need to know the medical history. They need to know these little nuances, because they're small details, but they're so crucial and so important.
100%.
Because look, any fan, like, we can go back and Nate Diaz, you can probably just throw a jab on his cheek and he will start gushing blood.
Yeah. And you could consider that a weakness of a fighter, but it makes you look like a badass.
Yeah. You know what's a perfect example, and this has nothing to do with women's MMA nor welterweight, but if you go to I'm trying to remember. He broke his nose. Mike Perry.
Yep.
Mike Perry. So and then the commentators were saying this and listen, like, the judges have been doing this in the last frame of the round, right? In the last like picture of the round, if you're gushing, if something's broken, they account that as, oh, you lost the round. You know what I mean? So and that's one thing for me personally. Mike Perry won that fight, but the nose, when it was broken, it was just blood gushing. Yeah. The judges are like, well, yeah.
But I remember everyone was being so fascinated after the fight about the nose being broken. How was he able to fight through that? They saw the picture. He got this close-up picture of his nose being basically deformed, and like I can see it in my mind right now, and how much he could have inflicted that damage. And that's another welterweight fighter, in Mike Perry, who can take that damage, and who's willing to make a fight. And I think that's really the definition of a fighter, is like, you're a fighter in not just throwing punches, but you're a fighter in taking the damage, and you can fight that pain, and you can fight that and utilize your adrenaline and utilize your energy to inflict damage on your opponent, even though that they've inflicted damage on you already. I think in that fight, I think that's a great example. You mentioned Mike Perry, is that he was able to do that with a broken nose. He was able to keep on going. Same thing with who tweaked their knee. That was in women's fighting. That was Macy Barber, who tweaked her knee in that fight against Modafferi, and she kept going because of that. Like, that shows the true grit of a fighter.
Yeah. And look, for a judge, I think it's important to look at that. But I don't know. Look, with the Mike Perry, and look, I definitely want to get your thoughts on this, because in a welterweight, this happens pretty frequently, because there's a lot, like how Jorge Masvidal says, there's a lot of violence in this division, and it's always like that, because in their minds, the last thing you see, and as humans, we're kind of like this, right? The last thing we see is it's the last thing you remember. So when a judge is scoring, they're like, yes, they're humans and stuff like that, but you have to look at it thoroughly, right? The holistic of the round. Yep. But the last thing comes in mind, remember that power shot? Or like, that's why it's so important to get a takedown before the round ends, right?
Yeah, that's, I think, what won John Jones that fight, was his attempted takedowns.
Yeah. And so, like, because there's fights like a guy's just jabbing, the crap out of the other guy.
Yeah.
But at the end, the guy just slams him down. Jessica Andrade, she wins rounds like that fairly easy, because at the end, she just vicious slams, and that can very well get you the round. And it's hard to score, because the other person's landing a lot of powerful shots. Their movement is exceptional. They're not getting hit. And they lose a round because of that takedown. Yeah. So it's for me, it's 50-50. It's difficult to score, but there has to be like a priority. Which there is, but it seems as the judges are not getting it. And then at the end, when they recap UFC 247, Dominic Cruz and Joe Rogan were talking about, listen, all the commissions have to get together and stay with a standardized ruling. Like, remember, I think it's like when they have one hand down and the others say it's two, and so and they were saying, look, Dana White after the fight too, he was saying, we barely have big fights here in Houston, and it was kind of embarrassing, to see these results. And that's the promoter. I mean, that's the president saying that.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal. And I think that's going to constitute a lot to look forward to in the UFC world, including women's fighting and also with my topic in welterweights, and a lot to look forward in our respective blogs. And as we look forward here in the UFC, is there any final words that we can discuss here as we exit the podcast?
One thing about the welterweight, I think it's just so stacked. We're
Can't get over that fact.
Oh my goodness, we're just waiting, and after the Super Bowl, that was the unofficial promo. Like I said earlier to you, it's the unofficial promo of that fight. Because a day after, Jorge Masvidal told the media and the press, like, hey, we're negotiating with the UFC. So I just felt it was a marketing thing,
Yeah, exactly, and it gives it helps with the anticipation of that. But it's either going to be Jorge Masvidal and Conor McGregor, or Jorge Masvidal and Kamaru Usman. I think Conor McGregor should fight Justin Gaethje. I think that's the next big fight.
Yeah,
that's in welterweight. That's a big fight, and also even lightweight for that matter could be. But yeah, it was a good podcast. Thank you, Christian, for helping with just the overall kind of like spectrum of what the women's, the entire women's fighting world has to offer. Because I loved your point about how it's the most equal sport in terms of women's and men's, and how equality is put to use.
Yeah, and then the buzz in the welterweight. It's been a while since the welterweight has been just. It's like the welterweight are like the heavyweights, right?
Yeah.
They're so relevant right now, and there's so much power and also, a lot of skillful guys, man.
Yeah. Also, it's just that division that like most versatile. You can utilize that Muay Thai, you can utilize that karate and wrestling. Like you don't see that a lot in like the heavyweight class or the lightweight class or anything. Like welterweight is that middle ground, and I love to take an initiative of that.
So yeah, that's all I have. Stay tuned into our blogs. On MMA Mania, we're actually working on stories about Joanna previewing against Zhang, and it's the one of the next events. So it's going to be a great night, man.
Awesome, man. Yeah, looking forward in welterweight. Definitely a couple fights. Sanchez versus Figueroa is the next big fight next week. That's a welterweight co-main at UFC Fight Night. So that's the next big event for welterweight. But a lot the storyline behind welterweight is who's that next big fight? What's going to happen in the stacked division? So in the stacked podcast, I would say it was a good one.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll see you guys next time right here on the MMA podcast with Noah and Christian. Right here on in the podcast studios of Radio DePaul Sports. Thank you for Radio DePaul Sports for helping us with the beautiful setup here we have for a podcast. So we'll see you guys next time.